Hello and welcome to yet another session of Creative First and our discussions with industry experts. Today, we're going to be speaking with Anil Lale, General Counsel, Viacom 18 Media Private Limited. He is a media and technology lawyer with over 17 years of experience in companies like Sony, Z, and Viacom 18. As the General Counsel of Viacom 18 and IndiaCast, his role spans Viacom 18's 46 television channels across the world, the OTT platforms Voot and Voot Kids, Viacom 18 motion pictures, live events, consumer product licensing, distribution and syndication businesses across the world for IndiaCast. In his previous role as the Group General Counsel for Z Group, he was instrumental in setting up Z's music business and managing legal aspects of its print, television, and online news media businesses. He believes that law and technology need to go hand in hand to unlock true potential of the media industry. Anil, welcome to this discussion and thank you so much. I mean, you do so much, so thank you for your time with us today.
Thank you so much, Lohita and Creative First, for this opportunity. And I'm really happy to be here.
Anil, in your experience working in the media and entertainment industry, what is the one fundamental change you've seen in the industry due to the pandemic?
Yeah, so the pandemic has brought in many changes across industries, across sectors, and especially for the media and entertainment industry, this has been a year of evolution. When I say a year of evolution, and I'm only going to address the most fundamental change that I have witnessed in this industry, is the shift from cinema halls being the primary mode of exploitation for feature films to OTT platforms. A lot of films which were ready for release when the pandemic hit us had no other option but to release on OTT platforms. And soon creators as well as the OTT platforms realized that they have unlocked a potential which they had not seen earlier. This has given birth to Bollywood original OTT releases also, as in we have seen Netflix original releases and Amazon original releases of foreign creators. But in India, it was mostly restricted to series, but now original film releases also that we are witnessing right now. And apart from this, along with this, it also brings a rippling effect where we also look at the industry and question certain things which has been there. Like, for example, I'm just putting one example there, is the question that arises from the provision of copyright law, which considers exhibition in cinema halls as the primary mode of exploitation of feature films and exempt such exhibitions from application of royalties. Now, what happens when OTT is the first stop for feature films? So this, as per me, has been a fundamental and main change that has been brought about by the pandemic.
Could you elaborate on this point a bit further?
So basically, if you look at the Copyright Act, Section 18, the new proviso that was added under the Copyright Amendment Act 2012, there was a royalty that was applied to all feature films, all cinematograph films. So when cinematograph films, as far as the Copyright Act is concerned, is any programs, but however, it took an exception for cinematograph films which are released in cinema halls or theaters, and excluded that exhibition from application of payment of royalties to the authors and composers. And the primary intent behind this was to address the fact that, at least in the mind of the legislature, it was basically the theaters were the primary mode of exploitation, and that primary mode, the authors and composers are already paid for. And so that primary mode of exploitation was excluded from payment of royalties, considering that that's a primary mode of exploitation. However, there have been several challenges on that fact already, which says that programs are also cinematograph films and which is intended for television, but is not exempted from royalties. And there is a differential treatment to feature films. But with this pandemic, the shift that has happened from cinema halls being the primary mode of exploitation to OTT platforms. Now the question arises whether this thought process still holds good. So the way the industry sees feature films per se, as well as the law, how it views feature films or the application of law on feature films, all these things, dimensions are changing and evolving. So I would say this is a year of evolution as far as the industry is concerned. And the lawmakers will also have to, kind of shift their thinking process maybe, and see this evolution, see this shift, and maybe bring the laws also up to speed to that extent.
And also brings, the question of, bringing things on parity, right?
Yeah.
That's what you really said, right? Do you see any trends in the legislative and policy framework in the media landscape, in these times, when the pandemic hit us?
Yeah. So, the with the pandemic, one thing, two things that came into focus was, one was the OTT platforms and other was the social media platforms. And these two platforms basically brought people together when they were staying at home. I mean, when physical interactions were not there, social media was the only, social media and social media applications were the main uh, uh, source for which the people use to connect with each other. And OTT platforms and even news OTT platforms were the main source of information for the people as well, because even newspapers, at one point of time, even newspapers were not being delivered, and the news were also consumed through OTT platforms, apart from television channels, which already are under a particular policy framework, like downlinking guidelines, uplinking guidelines, the program code, the advertisement code. It's a highly regulated field any which ways. But with the pandemic and shift of focus onto social media platforms and OTT platforms, now the policy frameworks are also developing. Like, we have seen the new Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code rules 2021 that has come into force, which brings more responsibilities on social media intermediaries. And there's an ethics code for the online curated content platforms, along with grievance redressal mechanisms. All these things are policy reforms that has happened in this year. I mean, this, in my view, was brought in due to the changing media landscape, as I earlier mentioned, as in the focus on OTT and social media platforms have grown substantially because of the pandemic. And I think that is the reason why this legislative and policy framework changes have also been brought into place.
What are the challenges faced by broadcasters today in the current statutory licensing regime?
So, statutory licensing regime, before I answer, I'll have to...
And of course, this is more to do with the television, television broadcasters.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. So, what is the relevance of statutory licensing? Let me start from there. So, statutory licensing basically is under Section 31B of the Copyright Act. And that was brought in, actually the root of that you will find in the issues faced by the radio broadcasters years back, where they basically used to play music back to back, and they used to survive on that. And the kind of licensing fees which were being asked by the music licensors back then was not sustainable for the radio broadcasters, and so they went under compulsory licensing. They got some kind of reprieve from the reprieve in the form of a fixation of tariff for them. However, this compulsory licensing was not exactly meant for handling this kind of an activity. That is why the statutory licensing was brought in. And when now, why a television broadcaster requires a statutory licensing is the first thing that we need to understand. So, there is the way music is used in television is much different from how radio uses it, unless and until it is a back-to-back play of television, music on television. But again, if it is a back-to-back play of music on television, it is music videos and not just sound recordings of underlying literary and musical works, which is covered under the Section 31D of the statutory licensing regime. So, if you look at the use of sound recordings and underlying literary and musical works on television, it is basically as background scores within a program, or in a reality show where a dance or a music is performed. So, that kind of usage, especially in Indian programming, has been customary and has been there for a long time. So, the issue that television broadcasters face in this kind of usage is that when a television broadcaster enters into an agreement with a music label or a music licensor, they uh, get a license only for a particular period of time, which is the term of the contract, for the sync of the music and utilization of the music. So whatever programs are produced during that year, to continue the usage, also they will have to renew the license. And while you renew the license, if there is a astronomical increase in license fee is demanded by the music licensor, then there is only one option for the broadcaster to agree to such demand in the absence of a balancing factor in the form of Section 31D, because removal of the music would damage the content severely. So, for example, the reality show that I was mentioning about, if a particular dance or a music performance is made, you cannot change the music. Once it is performed, it is synced. For the continued usage, you will have need that music only. So, to bring that balance in negotiation, the statutory licensing model can prove to be very effective. However, what's happening right now is that presently the licensing model has been drafted under Section 31D, keeping in mind how utilization is done on radio. The way of utilization, as I said earlier, in television is very different. And also television has evolved and is also available across various platforms. And that includes the internet also. For statutory licensing to be effective tool for television industry, at least, these lacunas would have to be ironed out through amendments. Otherwise, it is there in law, but right now it is not actually an available and effective tool for us.
So when you spoke about the lacunae, what are the challenges that, a practical problem that you face, because of the current regime? So, I mean, you're absolutely right. There are two different mediums and the usage is very different.
Exactly. So the basic and primary thing is that, television is not just satellite broadcasting, or does not only use cable or DTH or the traditional platforms for redistribution, but also includes internet streaming as well. So if you get statutory licensing which does not cover internet, then you just cannot use statutory licensing for the purpose of syncing of music for the programs which are to be broadcast on television. So that is one big lacuna. And also the rules prescribed for advance notification where the music is used, like programs in reality shows and all, it is a reality that the music usage would everything is depend on how the performers come and perform. So even the channels may not have clear visibility as to when, where, whose music is going to be performed and all those things. So this and also the way to sync music in the program and all those things are not called out under the rules. So all these things, as in from a television perspective, need to be looked upon. I mean, it is not just playback of music is something that needs to be understood, and the law has to evolve in that manner for this to become an effective tool.
In the era of online streaming services, has it become more challenging to keep a tab on digital piracy? And what, in your opinion, needs to change in order to protect content more effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one of my favorite topics as well. The online piracy we see in today's world is much more than just infringement, which our Copyright Act in which ways deals with. I always keep saying, and I can't stress it hard enough, that piracy, the word piracy, when we use the word piracy in this industry, is the business of infringement, and it is not just an individual infringement that we are talking about. And when I say business of infringement, what is the business of infringement? It is basically websites and apps which predominantly peddles infringed content. And that is what is hurting the creative economy today, if you look at it. Further, piracy is only the tip of the iceberg, as these websites and apps generate money from piracy, can very well be financing organized crimes and stealing private information of the people, and can very well be a threat to national security as well. Because these are not regulated. As in, we have seen apps which aggregate content across OTT platforms, starting with Woot or other broadcaster OTT platforms.
How do these apps work? I mean, this is more from an audience point of view, because today I can go and download any app, and I must say that we keep getting prompts throughout the day: download me, download me.
Yeah.
And this must
Yeah,
be happening to somebody who tried to download a movie innocently and he does
yeah.
not know how, tell us more about these infringing apps.
So, downloading the movie is actually a thing of the past right now. I mean, earlier, the major challenges was something like a BitTorrent or torrent websites, basically, where you get the link of the torrent, you download the torrent file, and then watch the movie on your computer or your mobile device. But that was basically peer-to-peer networking mainly, but now which is also called as P2P. But now the kind of piracy that I am talking about is much more dangerous than that, because this is streaming. These apps are streaming apps, which are basically pirate super aggregator apps. Basically, they basically circumvent the rights management or and other measures that we deploy, and extract the content from our OTT platforms and make it available on their own OTT platforms, which is not governed by any law, which is basically maybe sometimes operating from within India, sometimes operating from outside India, and to even identify who owns, who operates, it's very difficult. So and they are just giving all the content for free, and this content are very valuable, costly content which the OTT platforms and the owners of the OTT platforms spent a lot of money in acquiring or producing, and it affects the jobs in the industry. This piracies have become a parallel economy as far as the creative industry is concerned. I mean, somewhere I was reading it is at least 30% of the revenue of the industry is actually it's equal to 30% of the actual industry. Um, that much of leakage is happening as far as the OTT platforms and the content is concerned. And even if it is not on OTT platforms, also even the channels, television channels are also freely available on this kind of OTT platforms. So which basically destroys the subscription revenue and even the advertisement revenues as far as the broadcasters and OTT platforms are concerned.
When you say 30% revenue loss, that's a humongous number. How do these
Yeah.
apps make the money? I mean, I understand that there are these apps and they ask people to download, and obviously you are suffering a loss, but how are they making profits?
So
Are they, because most of them are free to download. So
absolutely, but so the thing is, they also are support. Some of them are supported by ad networks, and you see all the pesky ads when you try to watch the content also, and it's all clickbait ads also. It's not like normal ads that play. So if you go to any of those websites and try to play content, and when you hit the play button, ads will open up. It is not like seamless ads that come between certain breaks, which genuine OTT platforms serve to you. And also some of these clickbaits also steal information of the people who click on these advertisements. And in our understanding, they make money through two means. One is through advertisement sales, and two is by stealing of personal information, and three, I mean, this is the next step of it, is that how they use the personal information can also be quite dangerous, and you may unwittingly give access to your personal devices as well. As in, when you install the apps, first of all, it will not be from trusted sources, and you again give access to installing those apps from untrusted sources. Then they will ask for access to your storage. They'll ask for your location. They'll ask for your access to your mic, phone book. So it's anyone's guess as to what all information is going to them and how they are making use of it and how they are selling the information to others. So
it's interesting because you're actually making a distinction between, probably just looking for content vis-a-vis a real criminal enterprise behind these apps. So, people really need to be wary about this, which actually alludes me to my next question. In a recent seminar, you said that the most effective way to tackle piracy through a private-public partnership, which is like the Maharashtra Cyber Digital Crime Unit, is to have a central nodal agency with jurisdiction across India. We understand that Wycom 18 does work with the Maharashtra Cyber Crime Digital Unit, which is what it is. And we want to understand, therefore, how do you really envisage this and what steps need to be taken for the same?
Yeah. So the Maharashtra Cyber is effective in its own way. However, the fact remains that it's still a state agency and has its own jurisdictional limits. So ideally, a central agency would have a better reach because it will have multi-state jurisdiction and also can coordinate with similar agencies across the world also. So how to go about it, in my view, this kind of agency can very well be set up under the DPIIT, and which already handles matters related to protection of intellectual property rights, and also acts as a nodal agency for administering copyright laws in India. And DPIIT also works with World Intellectual Property Organization as far as administration of IPR is concerned. So they also have 5 territorial divisions for international cooperation and industry promotion as well. So it seems like the ideal candidate for thinking about setting up an agency like that. And also, if this kind of an agency can adopt a similar private and public partnership model, this can even lead to private players providing their technical expertise on the technology front, and also in maintenance of a central, pirate website list, which can be updated from time to time through the contribution of the genuine players in the market who abide by law, who abide by the ethics code, and all those things. Sorry. This central agency can also issue directions to ISPs to block these pirate websites, and this will help in reducing the burden of courts to a great extent also. And
so you're basically saying that they would also work with enforcement agencies.
Exactly.
And at the same time, so when you made a very interesting point about working with private players on technologies, etc. So would that be also an advisory role where they advise other enforcement agencies as to adopting these technologies? Because cybercrime is the larger subject today anyway when it comes to law enforcement.
Right. So, when I'm talking about a nodal agency, it is not just for maybe content piracy, but it can also handle other forms of piracy. There are lots of piracy happening on e-commerce sites as well, as in spurious products, smuggled products, all those things. So it can look into all these things, trademark violations, all of these things can be done, and in each sphere, the private players can help them in it's actually a very mutual symbiotic this thing, as in the policymakers can advise from their experience, or what they can also interact with similar agencies across the world and bring in their knowledge into the industry here and advise the players here. And the players can we do a lot of research and work as far as how to combat piracy. So those kind of things, even the private players can share with that agency. So it can be really a symbiotic learning experience as far as the whole industry is concerned. And also, the infringing website list or the pirate website list being centrally maintained also will help. As in, obviously, there has to be rules and procedures around something like that.
Do you have, we're not really, looking at how to formalize it, but how would, in your opinion, the list work, and why would it be effective?
So look, right now, how it is being done is that if wherever there is a piracy that happen, or we expect a piracy to happen, right now the only effective way of combating is to go to a court and seek a John Doe order or a dynamic injunction. So John Doe order, as you know, is basically an injunction in rem, means injunction against the whole world against infringing the content, that particular content. And dynamic injunction is where you have to provide a list of all the the known pirate websites which can actually infringe the content. So if a private player like us can compile such a website list and go to the court and seek an injunction, instead of that, what if the central agency has creates process and processes around it, so that anyone can submit a website and categorizing it as a pirate website. The agency looks into it. Maybe if the website provides for a contact information, give them an opportunity to be heard. If it is not provided, then directly it goes into the list. So this kind of things, if if the process is built around it, then that central that list, the pirate website list, can be a final list which can automatically be taken care by the ISPs, and ISPs can block it. It's like the DND list. Like right now, the DND list, all the telecom operators are supposed to at least comb through the DND list and ensure that whoever is registered in the DND list do not get a telemarketing call. Similarly, ISPs can look at the the central list that has been maintained and automatically block them. So it really takes care of piracy to a large extent, at least in the domestic front, and also saves time of each and every stakeholder in this process and the courts as well. And it will uh, take us a long way in combating piracy in real time. And that is the bottom line. And the piracy that's happening right now, especially digital piracy, is happening in real time, because if you take down one link, in another a few minutes or few hours, another link is up. So it's like a whack-a-mole game. And our law is so not as fast as how the pirates are. And it keeps on evolving with technology. How technology evolves, the way the piracy happens also evolves. So unless and until we evolve ourselves and take the fight against piracy also on real time, it is not going to catch up with all these people who are running these pirate websites and applications.
Anil, thank you for that. And you've been one of the most vocal industry stakeholders on this subject. So tell us about the work that Viacom 18 does with regard to combating piracy, especially since you all have all sorts of products, including merchandising products.
Yeah. So yes, I have been very vocal because I really believe that all the industry stakeholders should keep speaking about piracy and the effects of piracy and how to combat piracy, because only a dialogue will actually take us forward from where we are today. Because right now piracy is happening on individual fronts, and there is no collective front against piracy that is there today, and that is where we are losing the game. And Viacom 18 has always been in the forefront in combating piracy. We not only fight online, but also take fight to the streets wherever it is required. For example, the raids that have been done to safeguard the rights of our merchandising partners, as in we merchandise, products. First of all, we are the master licensees for a lot of major marks across the globe for India, and we license those marks for creating merchandise within India. And so we also take upon ourselves to protect those marks also. So we do raids in markets and all to find whether any of our marks are getting infringed, and we have done that successfully in the past. And also, apart from that, there is cable and DTH piracy also. It still continues. And off late, as in last week, we identified a new kind of piracy, which where DTH boxes are being hacked, and once it is hacked, it just opens up all the paid channels. So this is a new kind of piracy that we just identified, and though it is not very rampant, but it's still it is there in various parts of India, and it's very worrisome. As in, you get this kind of a box from a particular distributor, and then a hacker provides you a code, and once that code is entered, you have to connect it to the internet, and once it is the code is provided for, then it unlocks all the pay TV channels. So then you don't have to pay any subscription, and at the same time you're getting the services from the DTH operator also, and the DTH operator is also a victim here. So we actually
this is a kind of an illicit streaming device where they are compromising with a legitimate box?
Yeah, the legitimate boxes are being compromised by way of circumventing the rights management and the other information which is part of that box. There are certain kind of boxes which may not be the new boxes, but some old boxes in the market which is being repurposed for this purpose, for this kind of illegal access to the pay channels.
And what about Kodi boxes? How does is this the same? How does it differ?
You mean to say the
I believe that even
Android boxes?
Yes, I believe there are also Kodi boxes in the market. Know.
So no, Android boxes still receives the services also through the internet only. So there is some server providing the providing the content, and this boxes allow you to connect to that pirate websites. Here, what is happening is that it is the genuine signals which are coming to the box. So all the signals come to the each person's box. Now, according to the subscription that you have, the certain channels are locked, certain channels are unlocked. Now, what the hacking does is that the genuine signals which are delivered by the DTH operators, that protection is removed, so that all the channels become live, whether you have subscribed to it or not. So this actually is a more dangerous way, which needs to be curbed immediately, because it also affects our DTH partners as well. So we had conducted a raid just last week, and we have confiscated a lot of these boxes, and we also have got the information about the hacker. We are expecting the arrest of the hacker also very soon. But the person who was selling these boxes in one particular area, we have already got this guy arrested, and the investigation is on. But again, there's a new kind of piracy that has just cropped up. And apart from this, the battle on the digital piracy front, we already spoken about the cybercrime cell and all. We work with them, which actually was a very we had a very successful arrest that happened 2 months back, where two of the super aggregator sites called Top TV and Oriya TV, which was actually providing content of all the broadcasters, all channels, everything was being, all OTT platforms, everything was available there. And with one arrest, actually, we were able to bring these two services down. And
Tell us more
maybe,
about the operation. How did you go about it? And
yeah,
how long have these players been in the market?
so these players have been in the market at least, as far as at least we know, they have been there in the market for at least the last 2 to 3 years. And we have been tracking them. We have been trying to understand where they're operating from, but their apps, they're only available through apps, not websites. So the apps are not, we got the apps blacklisted from Android Store, Apple Store, and all those things, and they're only available on the black market stores. And if you download from the black market stores, you can access all the content of starting from Amazon, Netflix, Voot, and most of the other broadcaster platform, OTT platforms are available. Even channels were available. So
So you're
there
saying
was,
even marketplaces are not legitimate. There can be black. So one is the
yeah,
black,
absolutely.
the infringing app. And now
Yeah,
you're saying there are marketplaces also which are infringing.
exactly.
My
So the
God. Okay.
black market app stores are there, where also you can download this kind of pirated apps. And apart from that, even if you search, if you know about the service and you search for it in Google, also you will find it in some site to download that particular APK file, which you can install on your mobile devices also. Uh, but again, the problem with these files is that it is very hard to track uh, uh, who is operating it and from where. And how we got to him is through Telegram channels, where we found that one person was promoting these apps heavily, and has been sharing links from these apps and all those things on Telegram channels, where our the people from the cyber crime unit of Maharashtra, cybercrime unit, actually became part of those groups. They did a fantastic investigation. They figured out who the person is, triangulated his phone number, found that he is in somewhere in Hyderabad. Actually, a team from here flew to Hyderabad, and from nearby Hyderabad, his phone location was triangulated. He was located, and he was arrested, and he was brought back to Mumbai. And his bail was opposed, and our lawyers were also present, and his bail was opposed, and he's still behind bars, for the last 4 months. But after that, we have also made some arrests from Mumbai connected with that same matter. And thankfully, these two apps are presently down.
That's fantastic. Moving on to more copyright related questions. As you know, the IPAB was abolished earlier this year, and we recently heard that the Delhi High Court has instituted an intellectual property division. What is an ideal framework for IP courts? And secondly, there were certain very small matters that were handled by the IPAB, which had to do with vetting a name, etc. So how do you see that when it gets transferred to courts?
Um, I still think that it's an appropriate option especially for a developing country like India, which can focus on developing the IP expertise of non-specialized courts. We don't really need tribunals, and tribunals also does not guarantee that things speed up in a great this thing. It doesn't speed up that much. As in, firstly, we need people. The IPAB also was actually suffering from backlogs because there were no technical person involved, were being recruited,
Yes.
and all those issues were being plagued. Uh, uh, but with courts, the thing is that at least the judges and all are already aware of the law. I mean, they are experts of the law. As far as the technology is concerned, and a lot of other intricacies which come along with the handling of the IP regime, maybe it's also a good idea. I mean, it's a very good step that the Delhi High Court has taken, that they are framing specialized schools, which I hope also will uh, going forward maybe speed up these matters also. But apart from that, also I hope the courts look at something like allowing third parties to be part of the proceedings, like appointing of amicus curiae, which is basically friends of court, briefs in IP litigation cases and all those things, and also encouraging international exchanges between judges and courts dealing with IP cases. While IP issues remain largely governed by local rules, the global nature of laws makes this such a dialogue also essential. So things like this also, if it can be done, then I think this may be a right step in administration of IP-related matters. Yes, I understand that there will be some small trivial matters which will take the time of courts, but I think that's something we'll have to, um, uh, you know, something that's a side effect of the whole thing. But there are a lot of other major matters also. I think the courts can maybe give a speedy redressal for.
Right.
And yeah.
Anil, we are currently in the metaverse. We are going to embrace the next level of what is, a virtual reality, augmented reality. That's probably going to become a different realm altogether. What do how do you feel copyright will function? And, what's your view on this?
So basically, you are talking about the machine-generated works and all those things.
Absolutely. What are the challenges that you see, with regard to copyright protection when the metaverse is here, and
Yeah.
immersive storytelling happens?
Yeah. So it is a very highly debated topic, which basically starts with whether an machine-generated work is actually the sweat of brow or not, and whether it requires a copyright protection to be given. If copyright protection is given to an AI generated work, will it create an imbalance between the actual authors and the AI generated work? So so much of debate is happening around the world on this subject. In my view, actually storytelling is for the benefit of the listener or the viewer, and not mainly for the author only. So whatever benefits the audience needs to be promoted. And we have in the past seen wonderful creations by great artists, authors, composers, lyricists, painters, and now we are at the cusp of a new age where creativity can reach even higher levels. So, and when I say higher levels, where artificial intelligence is competing with human intelligence, so that will only increase the competition. And I am a strong believer that an artificial intelligence can never ever replace human intelligence and the human genius. I'm not talking about human normal intelligence, basic intelligence. I'm talking about the human genius, which is a what you call particle of God. So that cannot be replaced by an AI. And so I don't think the debate relating to the imbalance being created is actually relating to the genius, but only relating to those people which are the mediocre. The creativity is as the copyright law says, the modicum of creativity only is being maintained. Um, however, for this to happen, this healthy competition to happen, there has to be advancements of art, in the field of artificial intelligence, and it's important for investments of time and money to be made in this field. And such investments will only happen if adequate protection of commercial exploitation is available to the investor who causes the AI to create such works. So it's an important thing that that kind of a protection is there. And if you look at the challenges facing this, if you that I have spoken about this earlier, also is I see the main challenge not from this debate and all these issues that happens, but even if, let's say, under Indian law, it's kind of gray, but I still think that the computer generated works will already has kind of a what do you call it, protection under copyright law, and the whoever causes that work to be created is considered as the author and the owner of that work. But the major challenge which it will face is getting protection. In getting protection may arise from conflict of laws. While some countries may give copyright protection under its laws to AI created works, the some countries may decide not to, and this conflict will provide to be the stumbling block for such creations. And internet platforms, which is beyond jurisdictional boundaries, and even satellite, which is beyond boundaries, will go into those countries also. So if any country decides not to afford such copyright protection to works created by AI, then such works will basically can be exploited by anyone because it's not protected, right? It's a game for open game for anyone. And the answer to this will have to be involvement of international organizations like the World Intellectual Property Organization, and evolution of uniform laws like copyright laws also has developed as a uniform law across all the members countries of WIPO, right? And even WIPO is presently leading the conversation on artificial intelligence and IPR policy as well. So I think things are going the right way, and it will continue. And this kind of a healthy competition, I think, will bring in more exciting content to the viewers.
Recently, the Copyright Office, I mean, I'm drawing from what you just said. Recently, the Copyright Office recognized an artificial intelligence tool, Raghav, and they actually, granted and recognized it as a co-author of a copyright protected artistic work. Do you think this may be challenged?
This kind of laws and all those things will only evolve through, even if it is challenged. I mean to say that it will only evolve through two ways: either by a clear law that is passed, or if there is any grayness in the law that is already there, then it will be clarified by the courts. So I think it should, if it is challenged, it is only for the better, because it will pave the way for future works similar to this one, and maybe not co-authored in the next phase. Maybe it's completely authored by an AI. So we'll have to wait and watch. It's an evolving field, and the policy, laws, jurisprudence, everything will evolve around it.
Anil, according to you, what is needed to make Indian industry professionals more attuned to issues related to piracy and copyright?
So somewhere I feel that the industry approach to piracy is getting a bit muted, as everyone has started taking piracy as a harsh reality of business, which is too costly to fight and sometimes even impossible. So while there has been several good initiatives to educate people about piracy and how it affects jobs in the media industry, the digital piracy continues to ravage the industry like a never-ending pandemic. So that is what is happening today. And again, even when we fight piracy, also sometimes we also get very frustrated. Like we take down one website, and that website with a small change in its name starts up again. So it's very difficult, and I think industry professionals need to talk more about piracy in public forums and bat for more legislative teeth to combat piracy. Those from the industry who are also lawmakers, right, and make this bat for more laws which will give teeth to the fight of piracy. Associations in the industry needs to make representations for establishment of the central agencies like we were talking about, and manage the fight against piracy in real time. And we will have to take it real time. There is no other way for us when we move forward. And the future is OTT platform. Earlier, the digital piracy was not too that big a concern, because it was only people who had access to internet, which was very less, who had access to such digital pirated content, and that too through downloads. Now, internet is down to the grassroots level, and especially in India, the bandwidth costs are minuscule. And if you start giving content free through internet, then there is no way the other genuine platforms can survive, and even the viewers are going to suffer, because if this kind of leakages continue happening, then people would be hesitant in making such investments in content as well. So one big thing we need to make the lawmakers also understand is to distinguish normal infringement from the act of piracy, and recognize that our fight is against the business of infringement, and bring in more stronger laws, as in higher punishments, and maybe make it non-bailable for the business of infringement. I'm not talking about infringement. One person accidentally using a particular part of a work or something like that is one thing, but here a whole business and the economy is suffering. That is something that needs to be treated absolutely differently, and we as industry professionals needs to talk about it more, need to make the other people in the industry aware of it, common people more aware of it, and bat for more stringent laws.
Thank you so much, Anil, for your valuable insights today. And of course, thank you for always, being the force behind copyright protection and, content protection. Thank you for your time today with Creative First.
Thank you so much, Lohita.